So often people don't feel great this time of year. They do let a lot of their habits go and feel guilty and ashamed and like they're not worth it and they've failed. Whereas instead, you can feel empowered and confident in your food decisions and also not deprived.
This is the Women Who Podcast show. My name is Alison Fraser, and as you might have guessed, today we're talking about eating with Mikki Williden. I don't know about you, but it's this time of year where there's an abundance of food, and not always the foods that nourish us. I'm talking mince pies, sausage rolls, Christmas pudding and Christmas cake, calorie dense and everywhere. I'm in the UK for the holidays, which means foods I don't have access to in New Zealand, plus all the extra Christmas party foods. So if you're still in a food coma, this is ideal listening for you. Mikki is a registered nutritionist and host of the podcast Mikkipedia, which dives deep into the topics of nutrition, longevity, fitness, and health. Mikki is passionate about helping to translate science into practice to help people meet their health goals. As well as this, Mikki is a runner. She's a former winner of the Rotorua Marathon, but can now usually be found on the trails tackling ultra distances. In this episode, you're going to get some practical tips to take back control of your eating habits over the holidays or whenever there's an abundance of foods. Let's get into it.
Welcome to Women Who Podcast, Mikki Williden. Thank you for coming on.
Oh, Alison, an honour to be asked. Thank you so much for asking me.
You have got two podcasts where you co-host one, Fitter Radio, and you've got your own podcast, Mikkipedia. So you are a podcast professional compared to myself.
Well, yes and no. I have been in the podcast game for longer for sure. I do only really have Mikkipedia now, but also, anytime you podcast is just another rep, right? And hey, if you like talking, it's actually not that hard.
You first started, you came to my attention, my ears on Fitter Radio. Yeah. Gosh, how many years ago?
We started that in 2014, so almost 10 years ago. And there were very few podcasts around, actually. There was I Am Talk. I think they just recently changed their name to I Am Talk because Iron Man was, protected or something. I was listening to podcasts at the time. I was listening to Tim Ferriss and Rich Roll and people like that. And Vinny Tortorich.
Yeah. No sugar, no grains.
Yeah, loved it. So, and balanced bites. And yes, there weren't as many, but now there are just thousands of podcasts, which is awesome because it's such a great way to learn, Alison. I have learned so much more on podcasts than I ever did in my university career, albeit you do need to have the skills that you get at university really helps you separate the noise from the real deal in terms of information, particularly nutrition, I guess. But yeah, no, podcasting is amazing.
So Fitter Radio was, for anyone who's not familiar with that, a triathlon specific kind of podcast. I remember I haven't listened for a while, I have to confess, because I'm out of the triathlon game now.
Oh, do you know what, Alison? I was never in the triathlon game, but I was always I wanted to be because I loved the whole idea of the sport, but I was just so rubbish at cycling. I could not bring myself to get on the bike enough to warrant to in fact like enter an event and actually call myself a triathlete. So I was always a complete wannabe. But I sort of made a name for myself, if you like, in that triathlon space because obviously I am an endurance athlete, and whilst Fitter Radio continues to live on, I am not really part of it anymore because like you, it's not really. I have a lot. Actually, I do have a load of clients who are triathletes and I do work in that space, but it's lots of things evolve, and that was one of those solutions.
So you were the nutrition voice on that podcast, and you've now got Mikkipedia, which is, I love that name. Like I remember telling you when you launched it, that is, like, if you're going to have a podcast with your name, Mikkipedia is the best.
And do you know, I love it too, and I cannot take credit for it. A good friend of mine, she was in marketing and she was doing a host of like different things. She was like, Mikki, we just need, you could just do XYZ, and she'd created Mikkipedia because of my varied interest of nutrition topics, which is sort of is in fact true. I've sort of have dialed in a little bit of what I discuss now, but I am so thirsty for knowledge and nutrition that there's not a I don't have a sort of set, I'm only known for this. And so she's like, we should call you Mikkipedia because you have that, those different interests. So that's where that comes from. And I just loved it.
So you geek out on all things nutrition.
Pretty much.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So when you decided to get your podcast going, did you have topics that you wanted to discuss, or has some of it come from your listeners or your clients and you've used that for your podcast?
I would say both. Like, I have less about topics and more about people I wanted to talk to. I would hear someone on a podcast and they wouldn't necessarily cover all of the information that I was interested in. So I'm like, I wonder if they'd speak to me. So podcasting is almost a selfish pursuit to get your own needs met. And then you just assume rather arrogantly that people are all going to be interested in what you're interested in, so that sort of has come from that. But there are, of course, specific things that come up. I'm like, I really want to talk about neurological conditions in keto diet, and Matthew Phillips is the one that I want to talk to about that because he's such an expert. But also I do have clients who are like, they come with sort of maybe complex issues or mindset challenges. And I'm like, particularly with my solo episodes, I do think that's a really good place for me to explore a little bit further some practical tips, which of course I speak about with clients, but I think that other people might want to know on a broader level.
Well, selfishly, I wanted to have you on my podcast because not only are you a podcaster, therefore you are a woman who podcasts, but you are, I would say, one of the most prominent nutritionists in New Zealand. It may just be because you're everywhere, because everyone I know thinks you're the best also, that whole echo chamber. But
totally. I don't doubt it. I don't doubt it.
We'll just roll with it that you are the best. And so we're now in this period between Christmas and New Year. Some people may have overindulged over Christmas, and then New Year is typically that time where it's, I'm going to give up everything except for rice crackers and steamed fish. So I would love to talk to you about what you would recommend that women of a certain age, I'm going to say women 40 plus, how they can look after themselves in this new year and not beat themselves up when it comes to food.
Such a great question, Alison. And one of the first pieces of advice I can give anyone is don't ignore or don't let go of structure. So much of what we do around food this time of year is almost absent of the usual structure and routine that we would have at other periods of time. And look, I've got to say, like 2, 3, 4 weeks, no big deal, given that there are 52 weeks in the year. However, every time you do something, you're sort of embedding these pathways in your brain that tells you that this is how you do things, or this is the person that you are. So if you can continue the structure of particularly meals, and I'll talk about this in a minute, then you are just reinforcing the idea that you are organized and structured and you are in control of what you eat. A lot of the problems around food is that people lose that sense of control, feel like a failure, think, well, it's not worth it, particularly, New Year is around the corner. So I'm just going to eat all of the things, feel terrible about myself, start again in 2024. And one of the reasons why I think meal times are like making sure you keep that structure around meal times in the way that you eat is because so much of the food isn't necessarily a problem with the meals. It's the pre-dinner chips, it's the chocolates at work, it's the chocolate cakes or fruit mince pies that people bring in ad hoc and outside of that meal time. So if you say to yourself, I'm just going to keep the meals the same, I'm not going to eat outside of a meal for most of the time. You might have 1 or 2 days where you do, and that's fine, because 1 or 2 days isn't an issue. It's 21, 22, 23 days that is an issue. And then you're faced with trying to revisit habits that you had which really worked for you and to try to jump back into that, which it's harder to do if you've completely let them go. So it's much easier to continue those good habits even if you do have moments when your eating doesn't necessarily align with your health goals.
Yeah, there's just so much pavlova and, as you say, those fruit mince pies, chocolates.
Yeah. Totally. And again, there's nothing wrong with any of that, albeit if you're skipping meals to make room for that stuff, I think this is another area where people underestimate the amount of sort of the calories or the energy that are in things like chocolates or fruit mince tarts. And so they might have 3 or 4 going, well, that's breakfast. Whereas as a breakfast, it's high calories, high fat and carbohydrate and low protein, which is actually like a recipe for disaster for your blood sugar later in the day. And 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 I also think that people's mentality around this time of year, particularly if they've had a period of sort of dieting and things like that, is really like, well, it's one time a year, it's Christmas, I love Christmas, it's a special occasion, and I'm just going to eat the things. And again, there's nothing wrong with that, but how special is it really? Like, are they fruit mince tarts that your grandmother made? And they're things that you just love to have every single Christmas? Or are they the fruit mince tarts that you got at Countdown that aren't actually as special as what they would otherwise be? Like, so it's delineating between those types of food decisions as well that can really help someone feel good about what they eat rather than just eat for the sake of it. Because ultimately, this is why we're having the discussion, because so often people don't feel great this time of year. They do let a lot of their habits go and feel guilty and ashamed and like they're not worth it and they've failed. Whereas instead, you can sort of feel empowered and confident in your food decisions and also not deprived. Like, an element of restriction, if you're trying to maintain certain habits, will probably always be required, because otherwise it would be a free-for-all and you'd be eating all day. But it doesn't mean that you have to be deprived.
What about if you've been given some chocolates for Christmas and you just want them all gone so you can get back on track? Is it all right to eat them all in one go?
What a great question. Hey, you can do what you like. Absolutely. My best advice, though, is why not like have a few of the ones that you really love, pop them in the freezer and give away the rest.
That's a good tip. Never thought about putting them in the freezer.
Yeah. And then they're sort of outside of they're not in the cupboard every time you go into the cupboard, like, so it's like you can sort of forget about things when it's like that. But I guess the reason I say that isn't about the calories per se. It's just, how would you feel if you did eat a whole box of chocolates?
Not mentioning any names, I know someone who got some chocolates on Christmas and did that it wasn't a whole box. It was like a glass that was full of their Cadbury favorites. And they were like, I'm going to eat them all now. So they're gone.
Yeah.
Felt so bad for the rest of the day.
Oh, this is the thing. Like, we eat delicious things because we want to get enjoyment from it. Food should be enjoyed. Doesn't matter what it is. And if you feel good about eating an entire glass of chocolates, then who am I to say that's not a good thing to do? I mean, yes, it's excess calories, etc. One day is neither here nor there, for what it's worth. One occasion like that. But if it makes you feel sick, I just don't know why anyone would want to feel that way.
I think they realized the error of their ways.
I'm sure that they did. And hey, look, it's not like we've not all sort of been there, done that, but finding ways to enjoy, like, and of course, if you do put them in the freezer and you're like, right, I'll just have a chocolate a day, like that is actually a better way and a much more enjoyable way to sort of do it, 2 chocolates a day or whatever.
What would be your favorite chocolates then that would go in the freezer and the rest that would be given away?
So I don't even know that they make them, but I was a bloody good big fan of continental chocolates. Do you remember them?
Yes, that's a long time ago.
How old are you, Alison?
47.
47, yeah. So I'm 46, and it just dawned on me actually last Christmas. I'm like, no one's given me any continental chocolates lately, and I sort of scoured the shops and I could not find them, but I loved those sort of, and much more so than Milk Tray, actually, even though they're very obviously similar. I think the same, other than the chocolate type. And it wasn't because dark chocolate was healthy. It's just I enjoyed eating it. So that would be my preference. Or old school roses, which they just don't make anymore.
I like the UK roses. So I always look for the parallel imports in the warehouse.
Oh, okay. So I'm off to the UK actually for my father-in-law's 80th birthday. I will see what I can find. That's very good. A very good intel, actually.
Yeah. And in the UK, my mum would always get all gold chocolates at Christmas.
All gold.
all gold. They were, I think, made by Terry's. They were dark chocolate.
Delicious.
With the different fillings. And my dad would always get Black Magic.
What is Black Magic?
Black Magic is also dark chocolate. Like
right.
the fancy ones, like the orange
Yes.
cream and the caramel.
Yes,
Yeah,
like
so look for those
delicious.
too. Yeah,
I will. I totally will. And I think ultimately, during this time of year, we just you just want to do things that make you want to feel good. You want to come out in 2024 feeling like you were able to enjoy yourself, that you didn't feel anxious, didn't have the effort mentality, and you feel really good about the position you're in headed into 2024.
It's a good way of looking at it. And one thing I was going to say about my parents with their chocolates, because this is a memory of when I was, teenager, living at home. So they would get, a box of chocolates, and Sunday generally after birthdays or, the days leading after Christmas, we'd have lunch. And then in the afternoon while watching TV, the box would go round and you were allowed two chocolates.
Oh, amazing. That's a great way to do it.
Yeah. And you weren't allowed the second one until you'd finished the first one. So everyone had one, and then the box went around again, and then it got put away in a drawer.
I love those types of traditions. Whereas, and do you know the other thing as well, Alison, is that we get very caught up in tradition, which I love, or just festivities. And it's like, but it's Christmas. But the reality is that varieties of a lot of the things we eat are around year round, So it's not like it was when we were kids. When we were kids, it was things like chocolate were few and far between. We ate breakfast, lunch, and dinner. We definitely did not sit in front of screens that we do now, or the way that the kids tend to do. So just life was different. And I'm not suggesting we need to go back to the way it was in the 80s, but it's recognizing that we do need to be mindful of not using the holiday season as the reason for going on a bit of a bender. That's not very popular, is it? I think that people listening to us are going to go, well, she's a bit straight-laced, but that's the reality of it.
The advice you're giving, Mikki, I think is I think it's quite good, because we can overeat over Christmas and New Year and then carry on through into the new year, because we've still got all those chocolates and kind of tone and whatever. But then you can also go the other way. January 1st rolls around and all of a sudden you're not going to have any of those chocolates.
Yes, you can. And do you know what? For some people, it can be really helpful to sort of set a little date in mind of when you are going to, like, so like, I'm going to enjoy a few chocolates until the 28th of December, and then I'll give the rest of them away, and I'll sort of set myself up well headed into the new year. Maybe that's the kind of thing you do. Or in fact, you love overeating, because some people really do, and that's totally fine as well. Then give yourself a couple of days over the Christmas season, and it might be Christmas and New Year, or Christmas and New Year's Eve, or any time, but just in between times, if you do have body composition goals, then you try not to veer too far away from what you would otherwise do on the other days. Because, when you do overeat, what the body tends to do is it increases its energy expenditure to oxidize and get rid of those nutrients. So it's actually really difficult to gain fat after one sort of episode of overeating or one day of overeating. Like, it's incredibly difficult. Yes, you will weigh more because you've got more food on board. Your muscle carbohydrate stores have been filled. Plus, you'll hold on to more water because for every gram of carbohydrate you store, and we may store about 500 grams, you will store an additional 3 to 4 grams of water. So when you jump on the scales, you may feel bloated and also weigh more, but it's very unlikely to be. It'll be an amount, like a small amount of body fat, if any. If you do that for one day and then you get back on track, honestly, it makes no difference at all to your progress. Remember that, if nothing else, because the thing is if you overeat on one day and then go, oh, I've ruined it now, and look at all the weight I've gained, you're very likely to then spiral down into bad habits. But if you recognize that actually you haven't really done that much damage, none at all really, and get back to it, then you'll sort of come out the other side unscathed.
I remember listening, I can't remember where I heard it once, but it was if you've overindulged at breakfast and you've had a massive breakfast, you don't have to write off the rest of the day. You can just reset at your next meal.
Yeah, totally.
Is that something you tell your clients too?
I do. And I say sort of never miss twice. Like if one meal was not what you intended, make the next meal a good one, because everything we do is either embedding good or not great habits. And so the more you do something, that's sort of either you're embedding those habits and they're good or they're not, So, and it's always evidence, and our brain takes it as evidence. And so if you overeat, and then you're like, well, stuff it, and you overeat again, your brain is getting the signal, I just overeat all the time and it's rubbish. Whereas if you overeat and then the next meal you have like a light salad with fish or something, or like steak, and you feel really good and you nourish yourself well, then your brain's like, cool, well, I overate last meal, but I'm back to my usual. So it's all sort of data that your brain uses to tell you something about who you are and the type of person, you want to be.
This is all very helpful, Mikki, as we're going into the new year and trying to have some good habits that we take with us. I've been following your Mondays Matter program for a while with varying success. Sometimes I just go right off the wagon because someone brings in some sausage rolls to work, for example, and I need to remind myself that sausage rolls it's not an everyday food, and it's not one that I don't really need to have those ones. But
yeah. Unless, of course, they were like handmade and they're really delicious and you really wanted them, because there's nothing wrong with that. And it's just not eating just because it's there, right? It's the key.
They're usually the ones from the supermarket, the pack of 4 that you defrost and then you cut up and then just bake.
Yes, I know the ones. It's still delicious. Still delicious. And again, one sausage roll is neither here nor there.
Yeah.
4 of them on multiple days of the week. That's when we need to talk.
So Mondays Matter. I know what Mondays Matter is about, but can you let listeners know what Mondays Matter is and why they matter?
Yes, I love that question, Alison. So Mondays Matter is my fat loss program, which I designed in 2021, which utilizes a lot of the strategies that you and I have sort of discussed around mindset and how to frame certain sort of eating patterns and behaviors to set you up for success from the get-go. Because a lot of people come into a diet almost not believing that they can follow it, because they've failed so many times before. What's different now? So we do work on mindset, but importantly, it's an 8-week program, but it essentially utilizes protein sparing fasts, which is a type of approach not unlike the 5-2 approach that Michael Mosley sort of popularized. So very low calories. On my usual plan, it's 1 to 3 days a week where you eat 600 to 800 calories, and it's predominantly protein over 3 eating sort of opportunities, breakfast, lunch, and dinner. And the reason why we keep the protein in is to help preserve muscle and bone mass, because when you just straight fast, particularly as you get older, like if you're people like us in our 40s, we're losing muscle mass and bone mass potentially anyway. So we really need to protect the bone and muscle that we do have. So I'm not, and everyone's got varying opinions on this. I'm of the opinion that a straight fast isn't a great idea. So we know that fat loss requires a calorie deficit. So on 1 to 3 days a week, and everyone does it on a Monday. That's why Mondays matter. We have the protein sparing modified fasts, and it's lean protein, and it's very low carbohydrate and fat. Outside of that, we eat 3 meals a day. They are, if anyone follows me on Instagram, it's, protein centric. It's an abundance of vegetables. It's flavorsome meals. And we also, regardless, outside of that sort of plan, we bring in more sort of food and for activity that incorporates strategic carbohydrate and protein. And what I would also say, though, that when you follow the plan, there's also an opportunity to sort of eat slightly more than what you do on a diet, because oftentimes we're either on a diet or we're off a diet, and we're never really practicing what could be our maintenance plan where we're able to maintain our weight loss. And so throughout the plan, we have sort of scheduled diet breaks, which aren't just like bender weekends or anything like that, but they're just a slight increase in carbohydrate calories in that metabolic reset meal. And then, of course, there's the Facebook community, which I think makes the program, actually, because people just love support, and I love supporting people. And what we know from dietary adherence is to have that social support network is key. And so that's a really strong component of the program as well. And there are people who do the plan multiple times. One, because they haven't reached their weight loss goal yet. And two, because they just like the structure of it. And I think that's awesome. So there's we have resident experts in the Facebook group answering the questions, in addition to me and, of course, Darren, who does the exercise component. So in a nutshell, that's Mondays, if you like.
And will you be doing a Mondays Matter in the new year?
Yes, we will be doing our Shredruary program, which will kick off in February, if that name didn't already sort of alert you to that. And so it was very similar to as I sort of described it. And the reason we don't do it bang on New Year is because here in New Zealand, at least, a lot of us are on holiday, we're camping, we're, doing all the things, and we're a little bit wayward from our usual routines. And sort of by late Jan, early Feb, we're now ready to get back into the swing of things. And that's just a perfect opportunity to do it.
And I think that goes for Northern Hemisphere too. Like, don't start things on January the 1st just because it is January the 1st.
Yes.
Because you're still on a holiday from work, most people.
Yes, yeah, totally you can be. And I do wonder actually whether they're more that the holiday period isn't as great, so the routine isn't quite as disrupted. I'm not sure, but certainly here in New Zealand, I think it's not a bad time for us.
Yeah, we'll have links to those in the show notes, Mikki, in case anyone is intrigued and wants to go on your protein.
Amazing.
Protein sparing modified fast. PSMF.
Yep. That's it. And you've done it, Alison. How did you find it?
I still really love the cherry almond smoothie.
Yes, that is delicious. That's not a PSMF smoothie, but it's a good smoothie.
Yes, I would have that on my Tuesdays and Thursdays, but I would find that really filling. Oh gosh, what was my favorite PSMF? I would make a lot of protein shakes for my breakfast, and I ate a lot of eggs. Yeah, and I love eggs anyway. So if you don't like eggs, it's probably not for you. But just meat. I love eating meat. Yeah, we could just eat a steak.
Yeah.
Bit of salt and pepper.
So easy, and delicious. And I think the other thing is, because even people who think they eat high protein probably don't eat high protein enough at the times they need it. And we know that protein across the board is often distributed more towards the evening time, whereas people need more sort of throughout the day, breakfast and lunch. So we really work on a minimum of sort of 30 grams of protein, particularly at breakfast, to help sort of meet those.
I can remember one of my favorite ones was the chocolate omelette.
Oh yeah, that's a lot of people like it. A lot of people don't as well. But it's interesting, eh? And everyone is different as to what they love, and not everyone loves the program, and that's fine as well. You've sort of got to find what really works for you. Ideally, with some of these fundamental principles that you and I talked about, like protein, not being completely restrictive on everything, and so there are just elements that really work in a diet, and then just trying to find your way with it is, I think, really important.
And I think it's important to mention that not every diet works for every person, as most people who are listening and who may have dieted will probably know themselves.
100%. I totally agree. And so it's finding out what works for you. And because when you do, then you are more likely to adhere, and adherence is the critical factor, because if you can't adhere to something long term, then why would you start it in the first place?
Exactly. Now, switching the conversation back to podcasting, I would love to know what you have learned from podcasting about yourself.
I've learned that I'm a better interviewer than I thought I would be, not because I'm an excellent interviewer, but very early on in my podcasting career, I got feedback that I was terrible. So I was really scared to do it, actually. And I really thought I would be awful at it. But actually, it is a skill that you can learn. And I'm certainly not saying I'm amazing, but I'm way better than I thought that I would ever be. So I think that's insightful for me and my confidence in the podcasting space. So yeah, that would be one thing.
And what would you say to anyone listening who's thinking about podcasting but doesn't think they're quite good enough? Or, what tip is there that you've learned?
Just start. Honestly, get some reps under your belt. It's the same with anything in life. The more you can build a little evidence bank that you can do it, the more that you believe that you will do it. It's the same with diet, same with podcasting. And if you're interested in interviewing, just reach out to the person. The worst thing that will happen is that they say no. But most people want to tell their story, want to share their research, want to, communicate what they've got to share with a wider audience. So you'll be surprised at how many people are just really happy to give up their time to podcast.
Was there anyone that you were worried about would say no, that when you reached out, they actually said yes? It's like...
Yeah, heaps of most people actually. Certainly in my earlier, let me think, I would say almost everyone that I contacted, other than my mates, because I've got quite a few friends who are quite smart and who are interested to talk to. Dr. Gabrielle Lyon would be one, and Dr. Stu Phillips or Professor Stu Phillips, like people like that who are quite active in that social space, but also like super nice to chat to as well.
Have you got a dream list of guests that you'd like to get on your show? You don't have to share names.
Do you know, there are so many people out there, and I've talked to so many people who would have been on that list, and I can now sort of tick them off. But certainly the likes of, I'd love to chat to Libby Weaver, and she is like moments away from being on the podcast. She's sort of like, in theory, we've had emails to agree, we just have yet to find a time. I would love to speak to Mark Sisson from Mark's Daily Apple. Love him. You'll know him, Alison.
Mm-hmm.
But I haven't managed to sort of connect with him. I would love to talk to Chris Kresser. All the people that I listened to actually back in the day, I would love to sort of be able to chat to them.
Oh, I'm sure you'll get them on one time.
Oh, fingers crossed.
Yeah. I usually ask my guests a couple of podcasts that they like to listen to. Can you share a couple with us?
Yeah, for sure. So you and I will be and most people will be similar. I'm sure you sort of go through phases of who you sort of look out for each week. And so currently I love the Dr. Gabrielle Lyon podcast. I love The Drive from Peter Attia, Iron Culture with my friend Eric Helms. And who else Tim Ferriss, I sort of dip in and out of depending on who he's got on. And of course, Jill, my business coach. I love her FitBiz podcast and her The Best Life podcast that she also puts out. It's awesome.
Yeah. It's quite a few to be listening to. Do you listen to them when you go running?
I do. Mainly running. I'm trying to think. Oh, and sometimes in the gym as well. Like if it's an easy enough listen, then I'll just sort of listen in the gym.
Cool. Well, thank you so much for your time, Mikki. It's been awesome. And you've given lots of tips on how to not feel bad about overeating and other strategies to cope.
Thank you so much, Alison. It was really an honor to be asked. And I just think a podcast for women who podcast, such a fabulous idea. And so I'm so stoked for you that you've got this up and running. And I can't wait to tune in.
Cool. Thank you.
Thanks, Mikki, for such great tips. I'm definitely going to be using my freezer for things like chocolate. They're harder to see in there for starters. This is the last episode of the year, but we'll be back next week with more Women Who Podcast. Are you a woman who podcasts, or are you a woman who is thinking about podcasting? This is your invite to join the Women Who Podcast membership. This is aimed at women who struggle with the tech, with time, and with the confidence to podcast. We have a private Facebook community, and there's a monthly coaching call to help you with whatever you need help with in the moment, plus tutorials. It's currently just $15 a month, but that price is going up on January 15. So if you're thinking about it, now is the time to make that leap. You can cancel any time, so why not join to see what we're all about? I'll see you next week with an episode with Alicia Carlson from the Strong Her podcast. See you then. Thank you to my podcast supporters, Mary Hanlon, Kristen Wilson, and Alice Nichols. You too can support the show at Patreon. All links are in the show notes.
You've been listening to Women Who Podcast, the podcast for women with something to say.